Hello, everyone. This is Silly Linguistics, the very first episode of the new show, Genre Talk, and we have with us today Trevor Hill. Hello, Trevor. Good morning.
Hi, how are you doing there, Mike?
Doing excellent. Doing excellent. Could you introduce
Excellent.
yourself for the audience at home?
Okay, my name's Trev Hill. I'm a Brit, and I'm living in Poland. I've been living here a few years, and one of my things at the moment is writing stories, writing horror stories, things like this. I also play some music and generally try to teach English to a few people. So
Very
that's
nice.
thank you.
Is teaching English your side job?
No, it's my main job actually. Um, I've been I've been doing it for what about how long have I been here? About 15 years or so.
That's a long time to be doing anything. Are you satisfied?
Uh, generally, yeah. There's always room for improvement. But yeah, so I've got some students who really kind of embarrass you because you think, oh my God, this person's so good. What am I going to teach them? And they probably speak about three or four languages already. So
Do
yeah,
you
so
speak
it's
Polish as well?
trochę, ale nie za bardzo. Jestem bardziej złym studentem. So I speak some, but not a lot because I think I'm a better teacher than I'm a student. So
That's how a lot of teachers are. They're better at teaching it than learning at it.
well, what we say in Britain is those who can do it, and those who can't teach it.
I think we say that across the pond too.
All right. There's a few of your countrymen actually over here as well. So a few years ago, I was in a kind of rock country band, and we had a Canadian, an American, a Japanese guy, myself, and we had a couple of Polish guys just for the novelty. So, but there's a few Americans over here because we've actually got some U.S. military based in the border up by the border with Russia and things like that.
Very interesting. Very interesting. The
Yeah.
So you've been there for 15 years. What was that adjustment like, going from the old Great Britain to living in Poland full time and teaching people who don't have English as a first language necessarily?
It wasn't too bad a move, too hard a move because I'd been in the army in the 1980s, and I'd lived in Germany. So obviously, when you're on camp, everybody's speaking English. But I had experience of having to live outside in a sort of German-speaking area, and then I worked for a year in the Balkans in what is now the Republic of North Macedonia, and again there it was a lot of people didn't speak English, and I had absolutely no idea of Macedonian. So I was there for a year, so I did have some idea of this. And prior to me moving here, I'd actually worked with a theatre company in Poland, and I'd worked with them for a year and a half. So again, I got this awareness of what it was to live in places where they didn't speak the language. So the first few years it was a bit more difficult because less people spoke English, and what was also quite important was that a lot of them weren't used to hearing people learning Polish. So they couldn't always work out why you weren't speaking proper Polish or why you couldn't understand it when they were saying something.
That's very interesting. It's
Yeah.
Very interesting. That happens all the time to polyglots around the country. And
Yeah.
not just in this country, obviously, but all over the world, where they're trying to learn the language,
Mhm.
and everybody just doesn't understand why they're trying to learn the language, or if they understand why, they don't understand why they're not speaking it perfectly already, because their language is clearly the best.
Well, what I found in Macedonia was that obviously Macedonia had been part of Yugoslavia, so you had a general language of kind of Serbo-Croat, as it was then, which everybody spoke. But then they all had their own regional languages like Macedonian, Slovenian, Croatian, Bosnian, all this. And this was, I was there just as they were breaking up. So Macedonia had only just left Yugoslavia a year or two before, and they were still thinking that the Serbians might come down for a holiday, shall we say? And so they got the United Nations in there. It was the first. It was the first time the United Nations had got in before any trouble started. It was a preventative deployment. And so when I got there, what I found was that they weren't really equipped for teaching a lot of foreigners Macedonian. There were some schools, but some of the teachers weren't particularly great. And when I'd go to try and do something, and I'd be tripping over my Macedonian, and someone would just say, "Oh God, speak English." And there was a kind of impatience about, yeah, you can't do it, just speak English, or why do you want to learn Macedonian anyway? That was quite common. I found that quite surprising. But in Poland, I mean, I'm up in the north. It's a provincial town. It's one of the bigger provincial towns, but it was things, you go to the railway station and someone would ask you a question back, and they didn't know how to moderate the language down. Even people I know have said, talking to you is like talking to a 5-year-old. Well, gee, let's get the other side of the table and let me do some, future perfect simple with you, and let's see how much we moan then.
Don't worry, I am the exact same way with all the languages that I end up studying for my retail job. It's like they're speaking as a 70-year-old man, and I'm just now getting out of diapers and walking around trying to speak to them whenever I'm trying to use Spanish or French, or even a little bit of German.
Well, I found for like the first 5 years or so that I was here, it was all, you speak English, we must practice our English. And then in the next 5 years, it was, why do we always have to speak English with you? Why aren't you speaking Polish? And I had this one time when I was in Austria. I was in Vienna, and somebody said, "Why do we have to speak English with you? Why don't you speak German?" And I said, "My German's not good enough." They said, "No, we know you speak some German, but you've not even tried to speak German to us. Why?" I said, "Because quite honestly, it's not up to it." And they said, "Yeah, but you haven't even tried." I said, "I'm sitting listening to you, and I really don't understand a word you guys are saying." And they looked at each other and they went, "Ah, we're not talking German, we're talking Austrian dialect." And the example they gave me was, if you said in German, "Ich gehe hinunter," like what is it? I go down or I go below. So ich gehe hinunter in Austrian would be ich gehe aui.
Mm.
And I'm going, and you seriously expect me to notice there's not a difference?
I was about to say, it sounds like there's a world of difference between those two phrases.
Yeah, this was. I said that's a different bloody language. Come on.
Oh dear. I probably, I mean, I'd probably get along well enough with them, but that That definitely sounds like there's an iota of difference there.
Yeah.
It can't be as bad as the Swiss though, and their differences with German. If you've had
Well,
any
this
experience with them.
not actually with the Swiss themselves speaking German, but what happened was this friend of mine from Austria came to Glasgow to get a job, and well, she was there to study, but we got her a job, and we were doing telephone calls, like call center, and they said, "Could you try Switzerland?" And she didn't have a problem, and the guy said, "Every time we get a German here, they can't manage it." And she says, "Well, because I know Austrian, because I speak Austrian, actually Swiss Schweizdeutsch, as they call it, isn't too much of a problem, and I can actually understand that." So she managed a bit better than the average German did. Uh, but I remember going into a shop in Dusseldorf once, and I said, "I want to have a look at that book," and I'm going, "Das Buch," and the woman's going, "Bitte, please." I'm going, "Das Buch." Das Buch bitte, kann ich gelesen or something, I forget it. But and she's going, "Bitte," I'm going, "Das Buch, das Buch, das Buch, das Buch, das Buch, das Buch." And eventually I thought, she's taking the piss here, really, isn't she? And eventually, and she's pointing at masks, at boxes, and all sorts. And in the end, she gave it to me, and I just flicked through it, handed it back, said no thanks, and left. And my sister-in-law, who's German, she said she was making fun of you. I said, "I don't know." She says, "Come on, you do." She was making fun of you. Two words, one beginning with B. You can't mispronounce Buch. But I had a similar thing in Poland once. I jumped on a bus in the early years, and there's this old bus driver. Looks kind of like a walrus with a cap on. Weather beaten face, and I jumped on and I put the money down and I said, "Bilet normalny." So the correct pronunciation would be like "bilet normalny," and I said, "Bilet normalny." He goes, "Słucham? Oh, also, oh, oh," and I'm going, "Bilet normalny, bilet normalny, bilet normalny, bilet normalny," and he's going, and then I said in Polish, I said a phrase I'd learned for comedy effect, but I just went, "Oh God, I'm a stupid foreigner and I don't speak Polish." Yeah. Przepraszam, jestem głupi cudzoziemcem i nie mówię po polsku. And he got very embarrassed. He just went, "Oh, bilet normalny." And I thought, God, I'm on a bus giving you money. What do you think I'm asking for? I told that on the local radio recently, and someone said, "I bet every bus driver today is going to be asked for a bilet normal." So yeah, a lot of adventures.
It definitely sounds like a very interesting adventure trying to navigate navigate Poland with as little Polish as possible.
Well, actually, one of the things that was useful was German, because where I am, it's part of what was East Prussia. So before the war, it was a very big German-speaking minority. Well, until about the 1970s. Some were ethnic German, some were kind of Polish, Germanicized Poles or something like this. And what I often found was when I went in, particularly in the villages, as soon as I opened my mouth, they'd start talking German to me. And even if I was trying to speak Polish, they'd go straight into German. And I had it in the cities as well. It was this assumption that, you're foreign, you must speak German. And it was quite interesting because I was talking with one guy, and the next day someone said, "How are you talking with him? You don't speak Polish." And I said, "I was talking German. My husband's German and he can't understand him." And I said, "Maybe my German's just so bad that I didn't know I couldn't understand him."
Oh
So,
dear.
uh,
That's
or
uh
what I've had on a few occasions is where I'm trying my damnedest to talk in Polish, and they're just continually replying in English or German. So we went into a coffee shop in the Missouri area, the Lake District, and this they traditionally had this strong German-speaking community. Most of them left in the 1970s, went to Germany, but so they get a lot of German tourists. And I was standing with my mother. We were talking English, and I said, "Okay, I'll go and get some coffee." And I went over and I asked the girl for it in Polish. She replied in German. And I kept talking Polish and she kept talking German. And I thought, but if you've heard us talking over there, you'll know we weren't talking German, because if you talk German, you'll know what we were talking wasn't German. So why are you talking German to me? So we just kind of had this game because, I just kept talking in Polish and she just kept talking in German. So.
that's that's absolutely crazy.
Oh.
Uh,
In Glasgow, when I lived in Glasgow, there was a lot of old Polish guys there who'd come over with the war. You know, they'd been in the Polish branches of the British Army or the Air Force, Navy, and of course you go up and you try to practice your Polish on them, and they kind of look at you. They might give you one sentence, and then they'd stay in English. They would not talk Polish with you. And I wasn't sure if it was just that they objected to being used as a guinea pig, or whether they'd had to learn English to live in Britain. But I found it very hard to try and talk Polish with them.
I find myself having the same issue across the pond whenever I'm practicing Spanish with some Hispanic customers, because they are so used to trying to learn English, or they insist on trying to learn English. They will not speak a lick of Spanish with you, no matter how hard you're trying with them.
Oh, that's interesting. I think
Yeah.
also what you might find there is there might be some kind of sort of stigma attached to it, as in, maybe they've had trouble before when they've been speaking Spanish in a shop. Someone saying you're in America, speak English. So maybe that's another thing, they've had a bad experience with it.
Yeah, that's very true. There's been a few viral videos going around since Donald Trump became president of people harassing Spanish speakers around the country while they're speaking Spanish, and doing simple things like standing in an airport, or talking to somebody in line at Barnes and Noble. And there is a certain stigma attached to speaking a foreign language right now.
Well, we had a story, again, I'm never sure how true it is, but I hope it is true. And there was a Muslim woman from Middle Eastern, I assume, or Pakistani, on a bus in Wales, which is this country that's glued onto the side of England, and she was talking a non-English language, and apparently somebody turned around and said, "You're in England now, you should talk English." And someone said, "Excuse me, we're in Wales," and she was actually speaking Welsh.
Oh man, that's like speaking Navajo here in front of one of those bitter old ladies, and the bitter old lady saying, "We're speaking English here," and it's like, our language is here first.
Yeah. Well, in Wales, it's quite a thriving language. Welsh. It's taught in the schools. Road signs are in Welsh. You get amenities bills in Welsh and English, and so at your peril, say anything about speaking English in Wales. and it's quite easy to hear it on the streets. You know, people quite openly speak it as they should. You know,
Yeah.
I, I had a funny one the other day because I was a few weeks ago. I was back in Britain, and we visited the Welsh coast. Which, if anyone's thinking of travelling to Britain, yeah, and you're thinking, oh, let's go to London and have tea with the Queen. Okay, do the London bit, but seriously, go up to somewhere like Wales. You have the most fantastic countryside, a fantastic coast, and you've got all these castles. I mean, some of the biggest castles in Britain are up there. The history is amazing, and it's one of these places people don't think about. There's mountains and everything, but we were in this seaside town, very Victorian style seaside town, and I was standing there and I thought, oh, there's someone talking Welsh behind me, and I thought, that's not Welsh. And I listened, I thought, that's Yiddish. And and I turned around and there's like two old Jewish guys talking away. And I had noticed in this town, I thought there's an amazing amount of Jews in this town, like very Ashkenazi style, Orthodox. And someone had told me about this, and it turns out it was one of the few places in North Wales that had a worship house, like a prayer house or a synagogue or something. And so the Jewish community from Manchester, which is only an hour or so north of that part of Wales, they used to come. Well, they still do. They come down for holidays there. So it was quite fun. I've got like Yiddish speaking Jews and Welsh and somewhere, and then there's some like Arabic or Pakistani people, and I can hear all these different languages. And I thought, this is fun. I like this. I don't understand. I don't understand a bloody word, which makes it more fun. So.
Oh man, the amount of people who speak foreign languages here. I live in I live I say small, but it's more of a moderately sized town compared to the rest of the state. Moderately sized town in the middle of Kentucky called Henderson. We have a very large population of people languages. They're immigrants. Just across the river in Evansville, we have a very large population of people who speak German.
All right.
Yeah, it's a heritage language for them, and they've kept at it for all these generations, despite having very little actual background in Germany now.
I was going to ask that because there's I know there's a town in, I think it's Argentina or Brazil or somewhere, where they all speak Welsh. Because there's a lot of Welsh people went there, and they've made links with Wales to try and to keep the language going and the culture. And I've sometimes wondered this when I've seen documentaries about say Texas German and things like this, or Pennsylvania Deutsch. And I wondered whether they learn standard German or whether they just keep kind of learning the dialect that they have.
I believe that for the Pennsylvania Deutsch, the Amish in particular, they learn the dialect.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that I mean, it is of course understood between the two languages, understandable between the two languages, but the dialect is still more distinct than the original German.
Mm-hmm.
So they learn their local dialect more than they would learn the standard German.
Yeah. Well, I found this once when I was in Paris, and in Britain when I was at school, you learned French when you were 11 years old, and if you were good at it, you might learn it till you were 16. And you might start learning German when you were a bit older. So, I think they've changed it a bit now, but it was very late to start a language. But I hadn't spoken French in about 20 years. And I went into the shop. I said, "Pardon, monsieur, je n'ai pas parlé en français très bien." Sort of like, I don't speak French very well. And he says, "Ah oui, anglais or Québécois?" And he said, "Are you English or Quebec?" And I like every Canadian I tell that to finds that highly amusing. That he, I say, I don't speak French very well. Are you from Quebec?
Oh, that's pretty funny. I have to tell my Canadian friends that
one. I know in Poland it's quite interesting because obviously there's some really strong dialects in the areas. If you go down to Silesia, the dialect's very much influenced by German. And just below Gdansk, which is in the north of Poland, there's an area called Kashubia, and they speak. I think it's recognized as a minority language now. I think it's a Slavonic language, but again heavily influenced by German. But over in the east, you've got Ukrainian or Belarusian people speaking that there. And a friend of mine, he was Polish-born, Belarusian, and he wanted his sons to talk the language, so he was trying to teach them. I don't think there was any facilities for learning it, and he take them to his parents, and they wouldn't speak it. And he says, "Come on, I want them to learn our language." And they said, "Oh no, because they'll get in trouble. Because after the war, it wasn't seen as desirable to be speaking anything that wasn't Polish, or Russian, So Ukrainian was a big no-no, and Belarusian as well, So there's the small linguistic groups in Poland which quite recently have begun to come more to the fore, but it's very interesting when you're going into the villages and you meet some of these older people, and you suddenly realize they're Ukrainian or something like this, or one of the minority groups.
That is really interesting. There's a lot of minority languages, mostly Native American here in the United States, that have expanded from their original scope of where they have been. A lot of, especially the ones that were originally in the eastern portion of the United States during the 1820s, I believe, 1830s perhaps.
March of Tears and things like that.
Trail of Tears. Entire groups of people were forced from the east into the west and settled Oklahoma and other western states. And the minority languages that were left behind started forming their own little communities as well. But they just were not as big because of that forced migration, and it's a lot bigger in some of the western states now.
So do the languages either side of the country, if they're the same language? So it was mainly the Cherokee on the Walk of Tears, wasn't it?
It wasn't just the Cherokee, but it was a large portion was Cherokee.
Because I'm wondering, when they get over to the west, well, actually, there you say there were a lot more different groups. When they get over to the west, did the language start like diversifying from what it was in the east because of the different influences? If they were sitting with other tribesmen or people were speaking a different style of English in that side, did that affect the language in the long run?
I would want to say yes, but the way that the government treated Native Americans in the rest of the 1800s, a lot of Native Americans weren't allowed to speak their language or learn their language. So entire generations simply forgot, their ancestral language. The number of people who now know Cherokee and all of them, all of those Native American languages, the number of people now may not necessarily have had family members who spoke the language.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of these languages are nearing extinction because of the racist policies by the government in the 1800s. The fact that there are people who still speak certain languages today is just a testament to how badly those descendants wanted to reconnect with their ancestral pasts.
Sorry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No. Go ahead.
So, a friend of mine, American friend of mine, she was teaching in a school where there were a lot of Native Americans. I don't know if it was specifically for them, but she said there was signs next to the telephone, you will be cut off if you don't speak English. And it's supposed to be like a public phone ringing, so they'd ring home, and as soon as they started in Navajo or something, click. But this thing you were saying about the movement of people, that's huge in Europe after the war. So, for example, in the south of Poland, Poland used to be much bigger. It took in Belarusia, Lithuania, Ukraine, all these areas. And after the war, the borders moved westward. So a lot of cities in what now the west of Poland, they used to be in the east of Germany, and areas like Ukraine, Belarusia, Lithuania, they were made separate nations. Lithuania had been before, but it was part of a commonwealth with Poland. And what happened was that there was a policy of moving people. So people were moved from Ukraine into Poland. Ukrainians were moved into Ukraine, and Lithuanians. A lot of Poles in my area now. When the German population was forcibly moved to Germany, their places were filled by Poles from Lithuania. And then in about 1947, there was a lot of insurgency around the area from Ukrainian nationalists down in the south. And there was a policy of basically shifting anybody who spoke Ukrainian or what was considered a dialect of Ukrainian and shifting them into these different areas up in the north, up in the west, where you also had a lot of Poles who'd been displaced from like Lithuania. So talking something like Ukrainian was not a healthy option. And so, it was a similar thing happened in Greece and Turkey in the 1920s. But so they moved a lot of these people, and then after maybe 10, 15 years or something, some of them started moving back. But the culture never really recovered. And I was doing some field work down there at one time, and I was asking about old traditions and things like that. And someone said, they don't understand why you're asking this. As far as they're concerned, it died in 1947. And there was one point where there was a Polish woman who was she was a kind of language activist as well, and she was trying to promote this language called Lemko or Wemko. Now Andy Warhol was Wemko, just as an interesting point, and it's a Slavic variety dialect, however you want to call it. connected to what would now be Ukrainian. And the crazy thing was, before the war in the 1920s, when Poland got re-established, because Poland had been off the map for over a century, got re-established at the end of the First World War. So next month's the centenary of independence. And all these ethnologists ran down to these places, interviewed these guys and said, they're speaking a dialect of Polish. And then in 1947, they ran down there and said, no, they're speaking a dialect of Ukrainian, to deport them to different parts of town. So I was in this village up in the mountains, you go to an outdoor toilet in -25, lots of snow. You got to remember not to sit on the toilet if you want to get up again. So this woman was working at the school, and she said, we're teaching the kids Wemco. And this old woman, this farmer's wife, she looks and she goes, what a stupid idea. And she says, no. She said, come on. The kids are going to grow up, they're going to leave this village, and they're never going to speak that language again. She said, what is the good of teaching it to them? Teach them German or English, something which will be useful, because they're just going to go. And so they were arguing on this, and then the old guy said, women, what is it you're arguing about? There's no such thing as Wemco culture and language. It died in 1947. I mean, these were Wemco themselves. And he says, in the future, people will read books and say there used to be people called Wemco. And as a field worker, my mouth is dribbling at this point. Oh, boy. And I've got this on tape.
Oh, my gosh. I wish I was there just to see that clash between the past culture and the new culture.
That's it. It was funny that
strange.
A Polish woman was actually supporting the teaching of Wemco more than the Wemco woman was. But in another village, there were like Wemco language and culture activists. They were pushing the language. They were singing songs. They were pushing the culture, but they really got an uphill struggle. And in different parts of Poland, there's villages and towns that had schools in Ukrainian, so that they could study in Ukrainian. But again, it wasn't encouraged as such. So you can go to school, you can take your exam in, you can take your biology exam in Ukrainian, but don't think you're going to get a job in it. So a lot of people kind of buried that, but in recent years, since the sort of end of communism, perestroika and all this kind of thing, it's become a lot more acceptable. A lot of the younger people are pushing their identity. We've got like rock bands playing in it, like local guys who've got Ukrainian backgrounds, and they're singing in Ukrainian, and a lot of the younger people, Polish as well, they're very embracing that as well.
Very interesting. That embrace of culture with the language that is, I guess it's not becoming necessarily endangered, because there's still an influx of new speakers every year. But
particularly like in Poland now, it's interesting that there's so many Polish working in Britain and in the European Union. This like, I think there was over one period there was almost 1 million Polish went to work in Britain over about 4 or 5 year period.
That's a lot of people that's a lot of one group moving in with another group.
Well, this is one of the big arguments with a lot of the people voting for Brexit, was that the EU, the immigration from the EU was actually double what it was from somewhere like India. Traditionally we always had this link with India, and you look at some of the plans of the graphs, and you'll see like Indian Pakistani migration to Britain is 500,000 over that period, and then from white EU citizens, it's pushing 1 million, and that's in 5 or 6 years. And so, Polish is now the second biggest language in Britain.
That's
yeah.
That's a mind-boggling statistic right there.
It's pretty incredible because I grew up in an area where there was Polish expat. It was again like a provincial area, and there was a lot of Polish expats from after the war. There was Yugoslavs, and you could hear them with the accents, but they didn't really hear the language. And I walked down the street when I was last home. I got Polish, I got something else, Bulgarian. Two guys in the supermarket. I walked up and I said, "Can I ask what that is you're talking?" And they looked a bit frightened, and then they went Bulgarian, and oh, great, that's fantastic. Driving me nuts because I couldn't work out what it was, and I knew it was a Slavonic language. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge amount of people. So this was one of the things when people were talking about, Brexit and leaving the EU. A lot of people never realised how much migration there'd been, and to go when you think how many Indian, Pakistani, African migrants have regularly been coming into Britain over the last sort of 50, 60 years. And then you think that within the space of 10 years or so, Polish has suddenly become the second biggest language in England. I think the third biggest language in Wales, because it's English, then Welsh, then Polish. And I think probably in Scotland it's also the second biggest. So it's interesting because even some of the slang the kids are using, I've heard British kids go, "Whoa, man, that's extra." Like that's cool, that's hip. Well, extra is what Polish kids say. They've always said it before they went to Poland. They go, "Oh, the extra, that's cool, that's brilliant." So it's a big shake up in Britain, but it was interesting when I was there. I noticed if you go into a government building, you've got big signs in about, in Chinese, Polish, Russian, maybe, some of the Indian languages, Punjabi and Urdu and things like that. You've got all these signs in all these languages. I come to my local office for my immigration office here. There's nobody speaks English.
Well, we have the same thing in my town. The local DMV and the local Social Security office, they have this bullet computer screen that changes messages about every 20 seconds or so. And one time I counted out about 10 different messages in other languages. All the same message, of course, but 10 different translations of the same message. And I sat there and I looked at everybody in the room, and I realized I hadn't, in all the times that I've been in the Social Security office, I've maybe seen one immigrant in there. Yeah. So I've never really seen. I don't know what time of day they arrive, or maybe it's just bad luck on my part, but I've never actually seen very many immigrants in the office itself.
Oh, that's quite classic.
It is. We've been on for 45 minutes now. We should probably switch over and talk about the various works that you have written out.
Okay.
Yeah. so then we can give our viewers a small taste of what Trevor Hill does in his writing. You mentioned that you write that you love horror.
Yeah, yeah. I'm more of a ghost guy than a straight horror guy, but yeah, I've been dipping my toe into the horror, and thankfully it hasn't been bitten off yet. So.
Do you have any published works?
Not so many in the sort of horror ghost thing. I've got various stuff written for anthropology journals and things like that, but I was publishing some online. It started as a hobby. What it was I was running a theatre group for students of English. Well, it started with a crazy conversation one time, driving back through the winter forests of Poland with my Japanese friend, and I said, "Have you got any ghost stories in Japanese culture? You know, you got some good ghost stories." It was a stupid question, really. And so we started talking about ghosts and things, and then I think the next day I was doing some Nordic walking through the forest. You know, I got my shorts and my t-shirts on, which was again a stupid idea because it was the height of summer and all the mosquitoes were around. You're not scared of vampires here; it's the bloody mosquitoes. And I texted Yoichi. I said, you know, do you feel like doing a theatre play on ghost stories in English and Japanese and Polish? And so we're having this text conversation. Of course, I have to keep stopping because I'm Nordic walking, and each time I stop, I get attacked by more mosquitoes, and like my legs look like War and Peace in Braille by the time I've finished. Yeah. So,
good one. I like that one.
I'll let you have that one. So what happened was I basically sat down and wrote some theatre scripts. My background's very much in connected to theatre, and we put on this theatre play we got some costumes and things from the Japanese Culture Center in Warsaw, and Yoichi wrote things in Japanese, so his students who were studying Japanese, they could do all their parts in Japanese. Some of mine did it in English, and then we went a bit. We decided how are we going to get people to understand this. So we put some Polish speakers. They were in hoods, looking very mysterious. We planted them around the audience, and they basically narrated or translated the text from Japanese into Polish. So it was kind of like this lecture, you know, this aural subtitle floating around. And it was while I was doing that, I decided to write the story after that, and I wrote the story, and then I decided to see if I could turn the story into a play. So I was experimenting with taking it from the short story form into the script form, and it was in this theatre group. One young girl was very stupid enough to tell me that she had nightmares about one of the local schools in the town. She says, "I dream I'm being chased through this school by ghosts," and that school is actually built on the site of the old town gallows.
Huh. Okay.
It's a bit like Sixth Sense, you know, where he sees all the hanging bodies. And the crazy thing was, she didn't even go to that school. So she was dreaming about it, and I just thought, oh, that's just too good a thing, and I turned it into this really weird sort of story, and it was a story called Old Girls. So that was actually the one that was my first one, really. Can I mention it's on a website somewhere? Can I mention that?
Yes, of course. And in fact, in the comments below, not in the comments, but in the description, we will link all of your various works that
Cool.
are online and available for the average viewer to go and take a look at after they, of course, listen to our little podcast.
Yeah. Well, I, I published it on it's an American website, Dead Man's Tomb, or Dead Man's Tome, I should say. I think it's based in Texas, but also just after that, I just got this thing about writing ghost stories. I read a lot of M.R. James and Lefanu and people like this. And so I just got this spurt of writing stories with no thought of publishing them. And then a British-based website, they said, could they put some up? So I put some up, and then for various reasons, we parted company. I won't go into that, but and so he got them taken down. So I wrote to Jesse at Dead Man's, and I said, do you want these stories? So another one of them was called When the Last Candle Dies, and it was taken from the script of this Japanese play we were doing. And there used to be this tradition in Japan of like a night of 1,000 ghost stories, or maybe it was 100, I can't remember. But people used to gather with candles. Each person would tell a story, then they'd blow the candle out. So the further and further you got into the night, there were less candles. It was darker and darker. And then supposedly when the last candle gets blown out, the spirits might come. So yeah, it's I can't even pronounce it in Japanese, so I won't even try. But I based this story on this with some traditional sort of urban myth ghosts and monsters, like Hanako-san. She's this little girl who haunts the toilets in schools. You find a lot of Japanese ghosts live in toilets, and I don't know if it's just so when you wet yourself, you're in the right place, but there's several toilet ghosts, and so I put that up as well. And then there was more. I just started writing a lot, but also I was reading a lot more then. And there was a compilation by, what's her name? It's the woman who wrote The Time Traveler's Wife.
I know who you're referring to, but I don't know her name.
Because she wrote another book afterwards, which was a kind of ghost story set in London, and then she edited a collection, and it had stuff like not Robert Louis Stevenson, Arthur Conan Doyle.
Conan
Doyle, and another writer, and they were very gentle ghost stories. And I thought, so I was in hospital for a few days at one point, and I was bored. So I just wrote another short story, but it's about a woman who's she's become widowed and she's alone without a family, and she finds she's living in a house where in East Prussia in the 19th century there was a high degree of infanticide. And so I'd heard urban stories, that one of the things that you got an unwanted baby and it came to winter, you just made the bed up on the window ledge or in the coldest room and left the window open. And, lo and behold, you don't have a baby in the morning. So I kind of tied it in with that. I got quite interested in just local history, and I wrote about 3 stories based in East Prussia. So one of these was this story, Lost Kittens at the Window, and that got published on a website. I think it's Drunken Monkeys, I had a lot of trouble trying to put it because it wasn't horrific enough.
I think.
Yeah, it wasn't horrific enough for a horror site, and it was a bit unusual for some others. And Drunken Monkeys quite kindly put it up. I don't know if anyone read it, but and then there was a magazine. I think it was Sanatorium. It was a kind of horror magazine. I submitted a load of stuff.
I've read some stories by the Sanatorium before. I remember that one.
I think they're defunct now, but I remember sending them several stories and waiting months and getting no reply, and so I usually withdrew them. And then I was doing something where I knew one of the people who was the editors or somebody helping out, and I'm pretty sure she pushed it through. A lady called Caitlin Marceau, she's a horror writer, Canadian, and I'm pretty sure she pushed it through for me. And it was a story called Bitches. Oh, sorry, no, it wasn't Bitches. That was another one. It was a story called The Last Supper, and it's about a vampire hunter in some desert, and it was written in first person. Caitlin had suggested to me to write it in first person, so I did it as an experiment, and I named one of the characters after her. So she was very amused, and so they published that. But then, as I say, as far as I know, the magazine stopped going. And by then I was publishing more stuff on the Dead Man's Tomb, and they have a competition there called the Meat Grinder. You basically put something up for a month, and as much traffic goes through, as many likes as you get, and comments, favourable comments. It's a competition, and I put a story called Bitches up. And Bitches was someone had made a joke one time on a Facebook page about M.R. James, a ghostwriter. We had an American who said, "Yo, bitches, it's M.R. James time," and a few of the more stuffy Brits said, "I say, what are you doing using that kind of language?" And so I wrote a joke in about half an hour about some sort of werewolf schoolgirls, and I ended up sending it to Dead Man's, and it did quite well in the Meat Grinder. And then when the next Meat Grinder came out, I thought, well, Sanatorium's not going anymore, so I've got this more of a horror story than my usual ghost ones. So I sent that one, and that actually won. So I got about $50 on that, US, and so that kind of inspired me to move a little bit more into the horror side. So right. I've written about another 3 or 4 stories since then, but I just haven't got around to placing them. Obviously, with your own publication coming up, which was how we got in touch. Some of the ones that I've linked to you, and also this one, the Journal of Dr. Daniel Donington. It was an attempt to write something in a more kind of early 20th century, 19th century. This was the very first thing I wrote in my ghost phase after Old Girls. So I don't think anyone's got that at the moment. I think you're the only person with that one.
Well, well, I hope our publication is a success in that regard. Then, so then many people can see your very first ghost story.
I hope so. There was another one. There's one I sent you the other day, which was what's it called? The peer review process.
Yes.
I've got several friends who are either sort of hardcore atheists or practicing scientists or both. And I got fed up hearing this thing about, you can only believe something if it's in a peer-reviewed journal, peer-reviewed journal with strong impact factor. So I wrote that as a kind of parody of that article. I don't know if you've read it yet, but it's I got raised eyebrows from my friends on that one.
Yeah, I'm far more interested now that I know that it's a parody, because I sometimes hold that belief as well. I'm not a hardcore atheist, but I'm pretty there on that. I'm pretty there on that spectrum. I'm definitely gonna have to take a.
It wasn't so much. It's not so much a parody of atheists as so. It's just. I'd say I've read something. Yes, but was it in a peer-reviewed, impact-factor journal? As if this was something totally infallible, And I had to remind people that that one of the big things about the vaccination debate, the big paper that everybody cites about the MMR jabs, was actually in one of the biggest peer-reviewed impact-factor journals. I just like to annoy people occasionally. So it's a bit of a parody of Mr. Dawkins, of Professor Dawkins, and I actually sent him a copy, but he never replied. So.
Darn him!
I know.
Celebrity's not giving us the time of day.
That's it. I know. But no, I mean, like yourself, I tend to veer in that direction. I just find some of the more, how would you say it, evangelic members of the community there are a little open to parody. But that was it. So. That was actually published in something called the White Book, and there's a gentleman, I think his name's Michael Kellmeyer or something like this, and he publishes a lot of old writers who I think are out of copyright, so he publishes a lot of those with his own academic notes, but then he also does compilations of new writing or other writing. So I think he did that one. But I think you have to buy the book for that. But as I say, it's open for your good self to use or peruse as you see fit.
I'll definitely have to find a copy of that. That does sound pretty interesting.
Okay.
It looks like we've been at it for a bit.
I'll find you some links and I'll send them over. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. I've got to have plenty of content to fill the description.
Yeah, no problem. I'm looking forward to seeing the first copy of the magazine come out. I know I'm not into the second one, but can't have everything.
Actually, I think the toy maker's actually going to be in the first one.
Oh wow! Well, thank you very much indeed. That's a
no. Thank you for submitting the story. Uh-huh. It's a good story, like I said, and well, we obviously need content for every issue. People want to drag on about my own stories because I write, but I don't consider myself the very best writer, and so I'm looking for all these talents out here for Nebula Adnauseum. Now that Silly Linguistics has received Nebula Adnauseum under its wing as the I guess it's literary arm, there's a greater chance that we'll have a lot more people take a look at what we're doing, and we'll have hopefully a lot more submissions. The very first issue is probably about half my writing, and then half of everybody else's writing.
All right.
Because I didn't.
somewhere. Mm-hmm. But yeah, great. You know, I'll spread the word on. I mean, I like the fact that you were stressing the fact that you also wanted young writers. You know, getting people involved, because I know some people are very shy about putting stuff up. It's sometimes quite hard to even break into websites. You know, they get very select on some of their work.
Absolutely.
For me, it's more of a hobby. You know, I'm not looking at being a overnight success or anything, but it would be nice. But
Yeah, I was reading somewhere that the most indie authors end up making less than 10,000 a year nowadays.
I can believe it. Well, I mean, I've published in academic journals, actually peer-reviewed, impact-factored journals, of course, and you don't get paid for it. Not only do you not get paid for it, in some cases you might have to pay to get your article in there. So you've got pressure from a university that you've got to publish. High competition on that, and then sometimes you don't get. Well, you rarely get paid. Sometimes you have to pay to get in, and then I think something I wrote about 20 years ago. I just looked online a few years ago, and I realised they were selling the article at something like $40 for that article. You know, I get nothing of that because I signed my life away when I did that. But
it's really strange to me.
It's how academia works. A lot of people started going on open, what they call like open access journals. So I think a lot of the poorer universities who couldn't afford regular publications, they started doing online journals. And apparently now they've found out, they have found out that can be quite profitable as well. So there's some of those that are a bit more cutthroat than others. So yeah, I mean, as an academic writer, I never think about making money off it. So I think this is the thing with indie writers, you're totally scuppered in a lot of cases, unless you really know what you're doing and you really know how to negotiate it. I mean,
I think that's why I founded the literary wing Nebula Adnauseum in the first place, because I know that there are a lot of writers out there who will never make a bit of money off of what they do. No matter how good you are, if you don't market yourself properly, you're not going to make any money at all.
Exactly.
You're most likely to get rejected by a dozen traditional publishers. So through this process, we give royalties to every single writer, a percentage based on the number of people who have stories in there. I think it's a little less for people who just submit poetry.
Yeah.
And we're going to take a couple of the people who submit and help them form their publications. I can't remember where he's from, actually. I think he's from India. He's getting together a collection of poems, and we're going to help them.
Excellent.
Found their own collection of poetry. One of my favorite poets at the moment, Muhammad Ali. He's in there. He's a newer poet. He only has one collection of short stories. Not short stories, but poems at the moment.
Poems, yeah.
By the time issue 2 comes out, he'll have written out the entire second collection, and we're going to advertise it heavily. And I think you should probably throw together your entire collection of short stories at this point too.
Okay.
It sounds like very prolific over the years, and if you end up wanting to form a collection of short stories, I'll be more than happy to help you edit it.
Cool. That'd be great. Thank you very much. You see everybody. You've got to support this guy. He's helping us out.
Anything for the community.
Exactly.
honestly. The writing community, there's some stragglers, people that are genuinely toxic,
Yeah.
but on the all in all, we have to support each other as writers because no one else is going to.
I submitted one of my works to a publisher at one point when I was feeling on a bit more of an optimistic scale, and I sent it to him, and he said, or they said, uh, you know, we can speed read this. It'll cost £10, so that's about, I don't know, $15, $20, something like that. And
Yeah.
but I'd already bought one of the books from the collection, so he said, "Oh, you don't have to pay anything. We'll get this through." And then they sent it back and said, "We don't feel it's right for us, but we don't have time to tell you what's wrong with it. Please send us some more stuff." And I just wrote to them and said, "What's the point in me sending you more stuff if you don't tell me what's wrong with it in the first place? I might make the same mistakes." And I never got a reply. And actually, and their collection sucked anyway. There was about one or two good stories in it. But it was at that point I thought, God, I can't be bothered with this. And I found it was very hard for short story writers. You go for people and they want novels or something like this, but it was very hard to get places to accept, like, bigger publishers. So, a lot of us, we've got to work with magazines and things like this. But yeah, thanks. I'll take you up on that offer. I just sent out a load the other week because someone sent me is it the Dark Materials website or something where you get all the links to publishers. So I'll see how it goes. But I've certainly got a couple in the bag that haven't been touched yet. This is connected with the puppetry as well. So nice spooky one for you. Okay, Mike. I'm going to have to go because I've got students later on. So, and I suppose
of course.
you could do with some breakfast, probably.
Yeah, and I have to figure out. I'm gonna have to figure out how long this is gonna take to upload to YouTube because
Okay.
I've never uploaded anything this big before. I think the most I've done is about 16 minutes worth of material, and I'm gonna have to put something as a placeholder for the audio.
I bet all the girls say that to you. This is the biggest ever uploaded. Yeah. Ooh, that was very non-politically correct, wasn't it?
Oh, that's okay. It's good. It's good. We like to have fun.
I might get a job as a high court judge if I do that again. So.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having on. This has been the very first episode of Genre Talk through Silly Linguistics' official YouTube channel. Please like and share this video, and I hope that you end up clicking the subscribe and join our notification squad through the little bell next to the subscribe button. We appreciate Trevor for coming on here and talking about not only languages, but horror in general, and we'll be looking forward to his short story collection that has been just announced.
Okay, thanks very much. Bye.
Bye.